Hello, this is John Majori with MajoriOnBowie.com. And this is the Majori on Bowie YouTube channel where I post a new interview every week that has something to do with David Bowie. And for daily content, visit the blog www.majorionbowie.com where I post new material every single day that almost always has something to do with David Bowie. Today, I have an incredibly special guest who I'm very, very excited to talk to, Henry Hay. Henry, a pianist, composer, arranger, musical director, played a pivotal role in shaping two of David Bowie's key later works, The Next Day and the musical Lazarus. I've got the cover of the cast recording behind me that he was the director for. He contributed piano and keyboards to The Next Day and worked closely with Bowie as arranger and musical director for the play Lazarus, producing the original cast recording and leading the live band accompaniment for the filmed London production. Beyond his work for Bowie, Henry has worked with everybody else. Rod Stewart, George Michael, Ariana Grande, Dionne Warwick, Harry Belafonte. The list is so long that I could just read the whole list and then say goodbye, but I'm not going to do that. So let me just say that I'm very honored to have Henry Hay with me today. I want to add one thing, which I recently saw Henry play live at the now, I'm going to say annual, you could correct me if I'm wrong about that, Sound and Vision of David Bowie concert in New York City at the Cutting Room, where he and Mark Plati organized the concert, which featured 11 Bowie alums playing 30 songs. It was one of the best concerts that I've actually ever seen, ever. And it was like a religious experience. So it was wonderful to see you play. It was wonderful to see that assembly of musicians. And it was a fantastic show. I could go on, but Henry, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, John. It's very gracious of all of you to say all that stuff. And, I could use a press agent, so we have to talk.
Okay, all right. I'm very affordable. So, Henry, I'm going to get right into it because I think about how you got involved with The Next Day and with Lazarus, and you might want to tell the story. But in my mind, there's these two sort of no pressure moments where you show up for a job and you find out that it's David Bowie's comeback album, and you're going to play keyboards, no pressure. And then after he asks you to be the musical director for his musical play, which is, he's had this idea of having a musical play since the early 70s when he wanted to make a play from 1984. And he talked about doing it with Ziggy, and he played around with this idea of doing something having to do with Bob Dylan songs. And finally, it's coming together, and he wants you to be the musical director. So do you, when these opportunities are presenting themselves to you, do you have the sense that you're about to engage in something momentous?
The first encounter with David, of course, I was amazed to be called, and I should spell out how that happened in case anybody doesn't know. Tony Visconti and I had gotten to know each other because he produced an album for my longtime friend Lucy Woodward. Lucy's a fantastic singer, and I've been playing in Lucy's band for a while, and actually now I've been writing music with Lucy, but he was producing her Verve record, and we hit it off, and I ended up doing some other things for him. And then when David was working on The Next Day, Tony reached out to me and he said, are you around this period of time? And I said, I think so. I'm not sure. The life of a freelance musician is always this juggling about maybe, I hope. And I knew with Tony, it was quality work. I didn't suspect that it was David, but he said, please save the dates. You'll thank me later. He said something along those lines. It was a little bit of, I should have taken the cue harder. But actually at that point, Tony hadn't worked with David for some time. There was a long gap there. And then it turned out to be David Bowie. And of course, that record was so secret, was so top secret. And my very first day in the studio, was at the magic shop. It was Mario McNulty engineering and Tony Visconti and David and me, and that was it.
Yeah.
And the first thing I did was play piano on Where Are We Now?
Yeah.
The first day, and David was so kind about it all and so disarming, and he didn't want to have this. That proved to be a way that David was, that he wanted to make the best of the work. So yeah, to answer your question, I'm sorry this is a long way around, but to answer your question, that moment felt like a big moment, but the bigger moment and more shocking, and of course, immediate answer yes, was when his manager informed me that David wanted me to be the guy to work on Lazarus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Amazing. I'm going to tell you a very quick story of my worst judgment call ever having to do with entertainment. I live in Albany, New York, so it's up the road from New York City, and
mhm.
I remember going back in time to 2015 when I read that Lazarus was going to open, and I figured it's going to run for a while, and I'll just get tickets, and then he passed away, and the rest of the shows were sold out, and so I never saw it in person.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's pretty weird, and I think that that's a testament to David's artistic approach for it. That he wasn't gonna make it into something that was saleable for
Yeah,
saleable purpose, and he could have because he had so many hits, that he could easily have said, okay, well let's put the hits forward and let's just fill seats, and it could have been one of those where a Broadway show where they bust people in from Nebraska to come and see the David Bowie spectacle, but he really didn't want it to be a jukebox musical.
right. And he was very involved with every aspect of it, other than he didn't appear in it. Is that correct?
He did not appear. In fact, he didn't want to appear. There was a moment, if you know the play at all, I don't know if you've actually seen it since then, the video rendering of it. Have you seen the London video capture of it?
No, I've only heard the soundtrack.
Okay. Well, there's a moment in the play where there's a character. Actually, it doesn't even show up in London. There was a moment in the New York version where there's a character that only shows up in a video screen, and there was talk of having David do that character, but even David felt like it would be too disruptive, and the sort of when you have somebody who's a recognizable figure outside of the fantasy of a story, David knew that that could be displacing the entire story. And he
Yeah,
was very selfless about this whole thing. He
yeah,
was very selfless about he wanted the music to serve the story. He wanted the story to be first. Um, it's pretty amazing, and it's again a testament to his art and the
yeah.
artistic desire.
I suspect that anybody watching this interview is from at least familiar with the concept, but just in case, the story is based on what, and the music is where does the music come from?
The story is a continuation of the story of The Man Who Fell to Earth,
Yeah,
the novel by Walter Tevis, and so fast forward to the future where we have Newton, the main character, the main protagonist, however you like to think of it, and he's sort of progressed further down his rabbit hole, and he hasn't escaped the Earth. If you know that film, which is also very strange, and David was in the iconic version of that film.
yeah,
So then this character is plagued by all kinds of things that happen to him, and there's a mixing of fantasy and reality. And I don't want to give too much away from Lazarus, because certainly there's, like a lot of other David work, there are many parallels, and there are many ways that you can interpret parts of the story, which I think is so fantastic that he did this with a lot of his songs too, and lyrics where you say, like, does the lyric mean this? Does the lyric mean that? What's it mean? In fact, I was when we were at the cutting room, we performed "Oh You Pretty Things." I
yes,
was reading about those lyrics, and those lyrics have been contested about what they mean, and that feels like David's artistic lineage to say, Well, I'm not going to tell you exactly what it means.
Yeah.
You have to make it up for yourself.
Well, I was going to ask you about the title itself, Lazarus. Is it Emma Lazarus? Is it the biblical figure? Is it something else?
Uh, Again, I'm not here to be the determiner of how
Yeah.
this is, and I don't think anybody, even Enda Walsh, can necessarily. Enda Walsh, the playwright, who wrote this play based on text that David had provided for him. I don't think that Enda would even say definitively that it's supposed to be this or that, because I think it's supposed to be open-ended, where you look at something that feels abstract and you gather something from it. But my take on it is that Lazarus is the biblical implication, where you have somebody who's raised from the dead and maybe reborn and renewed. Maybe it's
Yeah.
a story of renewal. And there is, as strange as this play is, because it's very strange, there is a hopeful message, and it's joyous. And the deeper you look at it, the more you feel that there's a joy there.
Yeah. I,
Um,
I don't want to get ahead of myself, but do you suspect that it's going to be coming back to New York anytime soon?
don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know. I
Yeah.
don't think. I suspect it will never be on mainstream Broadway,
Yeah.
but there's always a chance that it could come back to some alternative theater. I That's, those decisions are above my pay grade, but I'm there for it, and
Yeah.
if it comes back, I'll almost certainly be involved. I'm still the worldwide musical supervisor for Lazarus, and it's had 3 official incarnations: New York, London, and actually Amsterdam. The definition of an official incarnation is that it involves Ivo van Hove, the original director, and Jan, the original set designer, and me.
Yeah.
And then there are licenses of Lazarus that have occurred throughout the world that use the original script that cannot be altered and the original musical arrangements. But then there's artistic license that directors can take with the rest of it, which I think is also in keeping with what David would have wanted.
Yeah.
People can easily interpret and say, it's funny, when we saw the reviews in London, people were saying that's not what David would have wanted. Well, actually, David wanted some pretty weird stuff, and it's exactly what he wanted. London was, as best we could, a copy of New York
Yeah.
in a bigger scale.
So I've read that while you're working on the play, at one point he shows up and he was singing the song Lazarus with the cast. Is that true? And did, did like what was that like? But also, when you're doing that with him, did you think of the song differently than you would subsequently think about it?
Uh, he didn't sing with the cast.
You didn't.
He sang with the band. The band was rehearsing off-site. They
Okay.
were rehearsing in Midtown at a facility that's no longer there. It was Gibson Music, and Gibson was in the old Hit Factory, which
Yeah.
now, sadly, as an indicator of some of what's happened in the New York music scene, is now condos. And
Oh.
Gibson had their factory space there, and they had a lovely rehearsal space that I had rehearsed with a lot of people, and I had a relationship with them. So we rehearsed the Lazarus band there. And David showed up in this. It was a perfect setting because it was a private space, and David showed up and sang with us one day. And I think he sang Lazarus. I don't recall if he sang Lazarus or if he sang something else, but I'm pretty sure it was Lazarus.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, yeah, I mean, that was certainly deeply meaningful. Um, I don't know that it changed my impression of it, because my framing of Lazarus, the song Lazarus, was always in the context of this play. And in fact, it should be noted that I received a demo of Lazarus that existed prior to Black Star. And it was much more aggressive. And that's the demo that I modeled my arrangement after for
Yeah.
the play.
Yeah.
So my arrangement of Lazarus sounds a good bit different from the Lazarus that's on Black Star. And actually, it's kind of fitting, because the Lazarus on Black Star it feels more like an end of life statement for David.
Right.
And it feels like that when you hear that and when you see the video, but in the play, it's a different place. It's coming from a different place, and it's a little more defiant. It's sung by a man who's cast as younger than David was at end of life.
Yeah. That's what I was sort of getting at. I didn't want to say it, but I think especially somebody who's not involved with making music, we might think of the video, which really sort of telegraphs an end of life statement. And
Yeah.
even, I'm thinking of the Cutting Room Show, where one of the highlights for me was the performance of that song. And I'm thinking about the interplay between Donnie McCaslin and Galan Dorsey, where he's doing this transcendent play, and she literally gets on her knees, and it was like a spiritual moment, that maybe I don't know, you were there and I wasn't, but when he's singing it himself next to you, did any of that sort of emerge from the song?
Not, it didn't strike me as much
Yeah.
then, but I know that David had lots going on in his head during that time, because he knew that his time was limited for some time. He knew this a while. And I was one of maybe 5 or 6 people who knew this for a year.
Okay.
Not a lot of us knew.
Yeah.
But he wore it so well, and he just wanted to create with the time that was left to him.
Yeah.
It was an incredible testament to humanity, the way that he acted and the way that he created in that space. And I think that because Donnie and I talked a lot before David passed. We both knew about David's illness, and we spoke a lot. And I've known Donnie since 1995. We played a lot of jazz together, and we would call each other and say, "How's he doing? Have you heard?" And blah blah blah, and we talk about things. And so I think that I don't think that David was one to in person project any sort of personal state. In fact, I think that David didn't want to project his personal state in person, because I think that he didn't want that to define him. He certainly didn't do that around me. He certainly didn't ever show up and say, "Oh, I'm feeling terrible," and I'm, any of that. I mean, he just didn't want that to interfere with the work. He was excited about making art.
Yeah.
Again, it's an incredible testament to the man as a human. And he could be funny, and he could be, he wasn't. We look at this artistic piece that he made, whether it's Black Star and the pieces of Black Star, and you say, well, he's really telegraphing something. And I know some people have said that this is his gift and this is his epitaph, but again, I do believe that David was somebody who had many parallel meanings in his work, and I don't think that David would be so direct as to say, "This is exactly what I mean."
Yeah.
I think that he was multi-layered.
I'll tell you, when I got that album the day it came out, and I started listening to it. Whenever a Bowie album came out, I would listen to it obsessively, for a few weeks, and trying to figure it out, right? What is this about? What is he doing here? And for a few days, I had no idea. And then, that horrible day, I wake up, I open up my laptop, and I got this terrible message. And all of a sudden, it seemed like it carried a new meaning. But, when I'm talking to somebody like you, who actually had actual involvement with his, his creative process near the end of his life, maybe we're assigning meaning to it that he didn't assign himself.
No, I think it's possible that he did assign that meaning, but he didn't. I don't think he intended it with the sort of bludgeon that maybe people think that it is. And I mean that to say that I don't think that David meant, "This is my death record." I don't think that that's what he meant.
Yeah.
He wanted to create music. Surely some of these songs he started writing before he knew about his diagnosis. He was a prolific composer and artist and conceptualist. And certainly, as you mentioned, this musical is something that he wanted to make for a long time.
Yeah.
And he's had a lot of themes of death and renewal and spirituality throughout his career, throughout his entire artistic life. So I don't think that, I think it could be easy to read into this as an entirely an epitaph and a service to his life, but I don't
Yeah,
believe that that's really the sole motivation or even necessarily the motivation. But only he's to say
yeah,
it. Probably he would say, I'm not going to answer that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I have to say, you know, because I think that he was just about making things interesting and
yeah,
he wanted people to ask questions.
yeah. So let me step back and ask a really basic question. Um, Musical director, what does that entail? So
Yeah, so it that takes on a different meaning depending on what you're doing. So
yeah,
generally, a musical director is sort of like a music producer for a live production, um, meaning that a musical director needs to have an oversight of what the project needs in a somewhat selfless way and realize the vision of the project's intent. It sounds very clinical what I'm describing, but I've been the musical director for some multi-artist events, an event at the UN, or a couple events at 92nd Street Y, or fundraisers or Christmas benefits with multiple artists. And there, my role is to coordinate everything, to make it easy for the artists, to make sure that all the details are covered. I talk to all the organizations. There's quite a bit of admin there. Um, and it's a role that I like because I tend to be sort of nerdy organized about things, and I like to take the vision about arranging things and making sure it all works musically. And in the case of Lazarus, it was about selecting the band, finding people who would fit for this, trying to find in my opinion the best ways to realize David's vision for what this was supposed to be. Uh,
yeah.
and then that involved figuring out with the limitations given and the setting given, how we can best give the emotional energy and professional energy to this project.
Did you have a say in song selection for the play? Like which
No,
of no,
no,
yeah,
no,
okay.
I did
Um,
not.
but you mentioned arranging the songs.
I
So
did. Yeah.
okay, yeah. Um, uh, so just sort of jumping forward a little bit. One of the standout performers from the soundtrack, who also showed up at the cutting room, was Sophia and Caruso,
Yeah.
who, from my perspective, is on the verge of superstardom. I think she's already highly prominent in sort of the Broadway ecosystem, but she seems like she's on the verge of being a household name. And she sounded great on the soundtrack. And her performance, what struck me about her performance at the cutting room was that she wasn't just singing, but she was acting as she was performing. And she's very, very young. And it occurred to me that you played this pivotal role in sort of landing the plane for Bowie, but sort of lifting off. I mean, did you realize when you're working with her and she's 14 that this young girl has potential?
Yes, of course. In fact, it was all kind of crazy because Sophia was 14, and then we had this very well-known star in Michael C. Hall, who had already
Yeah,
reached household name status with Dexter,
yeah,
and Christina Milioti, who now is like blasting off with her work with Penguin and all kinds of other stuff. But she already had some success, and it was an interesting thing because the Lazarus performance was in this little theater on the Lower East Side, and it was technically an off-Broadway play, which means the money is very low. For
yeah,
any viewers who are interested, the people were getting paid and the band were all getting paid very low money compared to what typical Broadway money pays, but everybody saw that this was a work of art. And we knew that Sophia was great. She was also 14 and um, very mature for her age, but we also wanted to look out for her because she's a 14-year-old girl navigating New York City and leaving the theater by herself and all this stuff. It was like, wow, There's a lot
Yeah.
there. And then when we went to London, then you have a 16-year-old girl in London, dealing with London. But yes, she's a machine. She's an incredible artist, and she works really, really hard, and she she loves music, and she emotes deeply. I've co-written songs with her and produced a couple pop songs with her, with my friend Nick Littlemore, who's part of Empire of the Sun, the pop band.
Yeah.
And Sophia's the real deal. Will she become a household name? That's an elusive place to be these
Yeah.
days. Who
Yeah.
knows how you get there? But I hope so. She's great.
It occurs to me, this isn't really a question, but it's more an observation. 50 years from now, she'll be about Patti LuPone's age, and somebody will be doing this interview about her. And 70 years from now, she'll be about Rita Moreno's age, and Rita Moreno's doing it. So I don't think we'll be here, but she probably will still be doing it. So
Yeah, yeah.
Let's move on to the next day, which is actually in reverse order. But it was so well received that between that album, Lazarus, and Black Star, Bowie's last works, and I'm including Lazarus in it, were really treated and embraced differently than most of the rest of what he did between the 80s and when he went on the sort of medically induced hiatus after Reality. And why do you think that is? And let's just take as a given that the next day, Black Star and Lazarus are great, right? Great music, profound, wonderful. But so was Heathen, right? So was Earthling, so was Outside. And I think that the later works have been rightfully treated with a kind of reverence that sort of elevated him into like the James Dean or Marilyn Monroe cultural icon status. What do you think was going on there?
I think there's a lot at play here, and I'm no expert, but there's a part of this that is revisionist history around an artist who passed before anybody expected them to.
Yeah.
David was well loved. After the next day, people were waiting for it. It was a big surprise. They were very smart. We kept it very, very secret. We all kept a secret for a couple years, and so that was a great positioning for the work to come. This is not taking away from those records. Those records are great.
Yeah.
I'm so proud to be involved. But I think that there's a revisionist history where people say, well, those records are the greatest records, David records. Were they? I'm not sure. I mean, they're really great records, but I think that a lot of David records were great, but maybe didn't resonate at the time because of timing.
Yeah.
And you can see this sort of timing connect or disconnect by, if you think of, for example, Norah Jones. Norah Jones is an incredible singer, an incredible songwriter, but her record landed exactly the right time. Exactly the right time. If a Norah Jones record came out right now, I'm not sure that it would become the #1 record of all time, because that's not the sort of record that is being received like that.
Yeah.
So I think that the time was right for David. The time was right for those records. The time was right. And David knew that there would be this thing about, whether people are liked or whether the art you're making is liked or not liked. And when I because I like to talk to students, and I do some master classes, and I talk to students and I say, you've got art and you've got commerce, and you're lucky if they connect.
Yeah.
But they don't always connect, especially if you're pursuing art. Sometimes you're going to be here. And even David, I remember having a conversation with Mark Plati, and I don't think he'll mind me sharing this, but we talked about that period that you're talking about where David wasn't as recognized.
Yeah.
The late 80s and to the 90s. And David said to Mark, you've got to have lizard skin to stay in this game. And I think that David did that, and he pursued his artistic endeavors without an eye towards commerce.
Yeah.
as opposed to somebody like, and I'm a big fan of some of her work, but somebody like Madonna. I think
Yeah.
Madonna always has an eye for, will this sell? And I
Yeah.
think that David, as successful as he was not of that. He wasn't made of that. He was more interested in, was the art honest to his vision for it? And that is also confirmed by a conversation that I had with him in November leading up to the premiere in New York, November 2015. Is that right? 2015? Yeah, 2015. It was Lazarus was getting a lot of attention, in spite of the fact that it was just this off-Broadway thing, and people were just talking about it. They couldn't wait to hear about it. New York Times and all the press were writing about it. There was a sort of fever pitch about it. And I saw all these articles and all this buzz online, and people were talking about it. And I talked to David, because we would have talks every week, even if we didn't see each other. I said, "Wow, it's getting a lot of attention. Do you hope that it goes to Broadway? Do you hope that, it's successful and make a cast album and blah, blah, blah?" And he said, "I just hope that it's good." And that was really, that was that was such a moment for me. That was such a confirmation of this guy who was an artist who wanted to pursue the art, who
Yeah.
didn't want to try to prove anything fiscally. And Lazarus was a big experiment, Lazarus the musical, because it was far more expensive than it earned in New York City.
Yeah.
And it was a big experiment. And David just wanted it to be the artistic thing that he went after. So I think that in that interest, he had records in the 80s and 90s that did not coincide with what people wanted.
Yeah.
And he just wanted to do those things. In fact, there were some records that never came out because he just didn't feel like they were done, including Toy, which only recently was officially mixed.
Right.
Leaked versions of Toy came out, but now Toy is released, and I think it's amazing. But there wasn't an official version released.
Yeah.
And if David had felt strongly that it should have been released earlier, then he probably would have done it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you about some specific songs on the next day, but before I do that, just one more question about what we're just talking about. When you're talking about how the next day came out amidst a kind of a mystery, right? It was being created in secret. It's after he not made any music for years.
Yeah.
And once it came out, he gave no interviews. He released those cryptic words that were associated with the songs, right? He didn't explain what that was. And I'm thinking about the contrast to the persona that he presented 10 years earlier, which was very avuncular. It was very approachable. There was this sense that it's the real David Bowie, which I actually don't buy, but maybe you could correct me on that. But so he has this sort of fun-loving, approachable persona where he's going on late night shows and telling jokes. And then he releases an album like Heathen, which I know you didn't work on, but it's this dark, anxiety-ridden album. The opening lines are "Nothing remains," right? It just seems like it contrasts with the persona he was putting forth, whereas the next day comes out and it's shrouded in mystery. And like you've been saying throughout this whole discussion, he's asking us to interpret it for him, and he's giving us nothing other than the music, right, and the words, and a few videos which are intriguing, like the video for the next day. It's like,
it's bizarre. It's bizarre.
Yeah. So is that? I mean, even if he didn't have a mind towards enhancing the commercial viability of these albums, did he strike it right by sort of remystifying his own personality?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I think that he was, and again, I'm just speculating, but watching the way these things came about and the way that he worked, when we talked, he was always hyper intelligent and funny and aware. And he would just be completely intelligently engaged. He was never sort of this bizarre, dark person. He was always interested and really funny and, pointing things out and making observations. In fact, I remember a studio session where we ended up watching some YouTube videos of this dancer from the 20s, when we were at Tony Visconti's little space in the 20s, 23rd, 26th Street. And so that's the David that I knew. And all the time that we worked together, that was the David that I knew. And every time that I encountered him in person and he came to my place. So I think that really was David, but and he didn't bend his art towards any kind of thing. I think that he made the art that he saw fit. So he might have been envisioning something darker in his art. And I think it's one thing to say, okay, well, I'm going to make the art and then I'm going to market it a different way. I think there's still a lot of integrity to say, I'm going to make the art. The art's not going to be touched by anybody, any outside influences. He's very famous for talking about this in interviews. There's a famous interview in the 90s where he's saying, I think it's a terrible mistake for artists to work for other people, for people, you can see this interview. It's one of my favorite interviews with him. And I think that was true for him. So maybe he had this vision about the art being dark, or a dark statement on things. And then he and maybe some other marketing people leaned into the idea of, like, how do we make this more interesting? Certainly, he's famously well-read and famously intelligent, and would have gotten plenty of ideas about how to dramatically launch something. I mean, it could have entirely been his idea about let's create a character around this record. I would not at all be surprised if that was his mindset about making a character out of a record, because he made characters. He made Ziggy.
Sure.
He made Ziggy, and then when he was done with Ziggy, he killed Ziggy.
Yeah.
People were like, why'd you kill Ziggy? Well, I didn't want to have Ziggy anymore.
Yeah. 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 Imagine if he was still doing Ziggy, 50 years later. It probably wouldn't work.
People would be expecting to see him at, like, Mohegan Sun or something.
Yeah. I saw Eric Clapton at Mohegan Sun. He was still good. But so actually, Eric Clapton, you said the first song you played on was "Where Are We Now?" And Eric Clapton was touring Old Sock. Do you know the story about how that album got its name?
No.
So he heard that song that you played on and wrote David Bowie a letter saying that it was beautiful. And David Bowie wrote him back and said, "Thank you, Old Sock." So Eric Clapton named an album after it.
That's hilarious.
So let me ask you about that song. In my estimation, in my mind, it's one of the great David Bowie songs. And I also remember when it came out, it was such a shock because there was no advance warning, and it came out in advance of the album the next day. Yeah. So then, I don't know, you probably know, several weeks later, the album comes out, and then the album itself, which has a lot of music on it. It's not Station to Station with 6 songs, or No Plan, the EP with 4 songs on it, which I'm going to ask you about. But there's a lot of music on it, and I almost feel like Where Are We Now sort of got lost in the shuffle. Like there was this period where that was the sole focus. But if you talk to a young person, they're going to know about Black Star, they're going to know about Lazarus. And do you feel like, is that a good observation? Like this is this great song that sort of got caught up in everything that came after?
Well, I think we've been in a rather transitory and temporary music and art world for a while, where people say, it's even worse now, where you say, "Hey, I've got my new release." Oh, that's so 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
It feels like that.
Yeah.
Where if you have something that comes out 6 months ago, unless it's incredibly culturally relevant or you're a humongous star, people have forgotten about it. So I think that even in, what was that? Next Day came out to 2014? Is that right?
2013.
2013. But then there was an extended, a bonus version that came out in 2014.
Yeah.
So I think that people it just happens that people forget about certain things. And yes, I think it's one of the great Bowie songs.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a big dance hit. It wasn't,
Yeah.
it is what it is, and I think that David would say this is the art that I made,
Yeah.
and I hope you like it, and that's it.
Yeah. So you come into this song, and how much of it is already how much of it already exists? Like, for instance,
A lot of it existed.
yeah.
And they said, well, why don't you go out there and play some piano? You know, we're at the magic shop, and there's this piano at the magic shop, and so I go out and play this piano, and you know, playing basically piano, and then I think I did some keyboards on that song, maybe not. I did more keyboards on other songs, but that's where we started.
Yeah. So at that point, did you hear or did you read the lyrics?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No, they just played the track and they said, here it is. And I said, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe Tony had a chord chart. I'm not sure. He might have had a very simple chord chart.
Yeah. So you're playing piano and keyboards on that, and then you're asked to play the harpsichord on, I think, an alternate version of I'd Rather Be High.
So that was the last session from the next day.
Yeah.
And that version of I'd Rather Be High was being created. I don't think this is a secret, but it was being created in part for a large commercial campaign, which you can see. Is it Vuitton?
Yes.
Yeah, Vuitton. There was this elaborate Vuitton video, which must have cost more than the entire recording did.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so insane. And they were playing this, and we were looking at it, and I actually said, "What about harpsichord?" Because I immediately thought this feels like harpsichord, and I'm kind of nerdy and kitschy, and so they liked that idea, and then I got to play all my harpsichord stuff.
I was going to ask, did you know how to play the harpsichord?
Yeah, well, I'm not a harpsichord player, but I grew up listening to and playing a lot of classical music, so I had some idea about it. And it turns out that harpsichord is a part of David's history. And if you listen to is it Karma Man from Toy? You can hear harpsichord in that.
Yeah. So that commercial that you referenced, he is playing the harpsichord, right?
Yeah, but he's not really playing.
That's you.
Yeah, that's me. The sound is me, but it's staged.
Yeah, no, but do you see that and say, hey, he should be up there singing, and I should be on the.
Nobody wants to see me. Nobody wants to see me playing the harpsichord. Much cooler to have David playing the harpsichord.
Okay, all right.
Like cool and not cool to have me.
I don't know. So I'm going to ask you about another song, which I think your contribution is very significant. God Bless the Girl.
I think that was a bunch of keyboard layers, right?
Yeah,
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's stuff that I love to do. I love to like add layers of keyboards because I'm a keyboard nerd. I have all these keyboards around me here, and so I think we just said, oh, what about this? What about that? What about that? And we were spitballing things in person, and these were all very small sessions, and they might have just been me and Tony and David, or me and Mario McNulty and David and Tony.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually, for the next day, I didn't ever track with the band. In fact, I didn't even meet Gail or Zach until after the record was out.
Yeah.
I was an add-on later. But I'm so thankful for it, and I'm thankful to Tony for introducing me to David, because it turned out that my relationship with David and his trust in me was enough to lead to the Lazarus situation, and that was life-changing. So
yeah. That's just sticking with that song for just one more question. Is this another one where you don't know the lyrics while you're making the music?
Did not know the lyrics.
Then you hear the final version, and I was going to ask you, what is that song about? Or are you still asking that question yourself?
Well, here we go again. I mean, what do you think that song's about? I think that's what David would say to you.
Yeah.
He was definitely never somebody to say, this is what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah. I've put quite a bit of thought into that, but I want to hear from you. I mean,
well, it's good. You know, I don't have a clear answer. And I think that if you keep asking that question, then you'll have entertainment for the rest of your life.
All right. Okay. let's leave that at that. So I want to ask about one other piece of music that you're on, which is the EP No Plan, which was
Okay.
posthumously released.
Hmm.
And it has some of Bowie's versions of some of the original music from the play Lazarus. And I don't think that it is as widely known as either um, uh, The Next Day or Black Star or Lazarus. But in a sense, it's really Bowie's last album. It's an EP. It's not an LP.
Hmm.
Do you think that, like, did you feel like, couldn't we find like maybe two more songs and make it an LP, and then it would be better known?
No, I think that first of all, it should be said that there were three pieces of music, three songs that he wrote specifically for the musical theater production Lazarus. Because people don't know the theater piece, which is most people assume that everything is attached to Black Star. But
Yeah.
actually, he wrote the piece Lazarus for the play,
Hmm.
and he wrote No Plan for the play,
Yeah.
and he wrote Killing a Little Time for the play.
Yeah.
He wrote them all for the play, and I have demos of all of them. I have a demo of No Plan that has a working title with David singing without lyrics. It's kind of amazing, and it's very raw. And I have a demo of Lazarus, which is called The Hunger originally, and I think that's publicly known, but it was originally called the Hunger. And I have demos that he sent to me. He's like, new song for the musical, and this was before they had tracked anything for Black Star, I believe. And I think the idea with releasing them alongside the cast album versions was to raise more attention towards the theatrical piece, because the theatrical piece Lazarus was very important to David. As you pointed out, it was a life's ambition for him. And actually, when Robert Fox talked to me, Robert Fox is one of the producers of Lazarus. For your viewers, Robert Fox is a very well-known, conscientious, and successful theater producer based in London. He's one of the executive producers of The Crown, for example. He works in TV as well. But Robert and I had a lunch, and he said that he'd known David for years, and he feels so grateful to be involved in Lazarus because David wanted to do this for a long time.
Yeah.
So I think that David had this piece in mind for a while, and so those pieces being coupled with the theater music of Lazarus makes very much sense for those four songs to be together in the two different versions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you're watching this and you have not heard the EP, it's well worth tracking down, and you might be hearing songs that you never heard before.
Yeah.
They're very, very good.
Yeah.
So Henry, you've been great, and I could talk to you all night, but I don't want to do that to you. So let me just ask you a few sort of wrap up questions. Starting with the cutting room show, which
Uh-huh.
I characterized as annual. I think you did the first one in 2016.
We did the first one in the fall of 2016.
Yeah.
And then we started doing them in January around his birthday, starting
Yeah.
in 2017. We skipped 1 year because of COVID. But yes, this has been a process for those of us who worked with David to get together and to feel some joy around this, because he was somebody who, I might have mentioned it on the microphone at the cutting room, that he was really good at picking people. And the people that he picked all feel like to me, they feel like really quality people with integrity and nice people. And so it's such a joy to play with those musicians, that many of whom I met through my association with David.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I'll tell you this. It's, I think I never met David Bowie, but if I did, one of the things that I would thank him for is introducing me to other musicians that I wouldn't have otherwise known. And no, I mean, you said it, but you were talking about your own contribution to some of the music that we all know. Even people that don't know your name know the work that you did. And that a lot of these songs would not be the same song if somebody else played the part, right? So if it's not Henry Hay and instead it's Mike Garson, it might still be a great song, but it would be a different song, right? And so this is a question really. He's not dictating what he wants you to do. He's asking you to take the clay that he's giving you and to mold it. Is that correct?
That's a really good metaphor for how he liked to work. He
Yeah.
was so encouraging, and I think if you talk to if you get a chance to talk with any of the actors involved in Lazarus, and I could probably make some introductions. Um, yeah, they would say the same thing, and in that he was very welcoming to see what you do with his work.
Yeah.
And it was such a revelation to me and such a learning point for me as a musical director, as a producer, as somebody who would lead other people or guide other people. He never said, no, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Those words never came out of his mouth.
Yeah.
He would say, well, that's, he might, if he really didn't like something, he might say, well, that's good, but I might like to try something else.
Yeah.
Like really gentle, and he would trust you, and he'd be curious to see what you did with his work. And again, he picked people well. He chose people, and because he was so smart, I think he really checked people out. I talked to Catherine Russell about this. Catherine Russell, who was in the show, and Catherine Russell, who she's astounding to me. She toured with David and a host of other pop stars, and then created a Grammy-winning career as a jazz vocalist. Can't think of many people who've done what she's done. But I talked with her about the idea that David was really good at choosing people.
Yeah.
And he would pick people to care for his art. So imagine you've got this art that you made and you love it and you feel precious about it and protective about it, and you're handing it off to somebody else. And he was so good at picking people, and the way that he coached people, he really caused people to want to bring out their best for him. And the way that he fostered that attention, and he could give general cues about emotion. And that's how we worked with Lazarus. Like, this should feel like this. And we talked about how this certain part should feel, and it was theatrical. So this character is doing this thing, it's coming out of this feeling, and then we want it to feel like this. This is what's happening. So he would explain how it's supposed to feel, and then you endeavor to make sure it feels like that. And this illustrates how great of an actor Christina Milioti is, because that character is in a moment of defiance and frustration when that character sings the song.
Yeah.
So she does it so well. And the emotion was heightened on the day that we recorded the vocalist for the cast album, because you may or may not know this story. That was the morning after Bowie passed.
How do you do that? How do you do the cast recording the moment after?
You do it because it's the thing to do. It's the right thing to do. We had it scheduled. All these actors are very busy. Michael C. Hall, Christina Milioti, Michael Esper, Sophia, they were all they were going to scatter like the wind.
Yeah.
Kevin Killen, the engineer, they were all going to be gone. We had the day booked. It was not going to be possible to do this any other time. So we booked it. And then I got the call late at night. I don't know if you read about how that happened to me. I'm happy to.
No, yeah, I have not. Yeah.
I got a text from David's manager at, I don't think I'm telling anything has to be so secret, at 2 a.m. I was still up because as a producer and as somebody who's the organizer, I'm just trying to make sure I'm not forgetting anything before we go in for this very important cast recording day. I knew that David had been ill and I hadn't had contact with him, but I got a text from David's manager at 2 a.m. and he said, "Are you up?" And I thought, okay, Bill's traveling all the time, because Bill's a very powerful, and as lovely as Bill is, he's one of the most powerful managers in the business. You never know it to meet him because he's this gentle person, but it shows how good he is. Anyway, so he sends me this text, and I thought maybe he sent this before and it didn't get sent, and when you get off a plane and then the text goes out after you've been out of contact for 5 hours. So I wrote back. I said, "Did you mean to send this now?" And he said, "Yes." And I thought, I know what this is. And we talked on the phone.
Yeah.
And he passed the message on. And I said, "What am I going to do?" And I went downstairs to write to the actors, and I wrote everybody an email. And I said, most of you, probably by the time you see this email, you'll have gotten the news, but this happened, and we need to go to the studio and we need to make this, because this was a lifelong dream of David, and it's important.
Yeah. Wow.
So that was important, and that brought so much emotional energy to the recording.
Sure. It's a great album. It's an album that it's part of my rotation. And again, I'm saying this not to you, but anybody who's watching this, that if you're not familiar with it, you're hearing songs that are familiar, but they're performed in a different way. And there is this emotion that runs through the album that it's definitely worth getting and listening to. And if you like Bowie's music, it's I can't speak I can't say enough positive things about it. So
thank you.
Yeah.
There are photos that exist. I don't know if they'll ever see the light of day, but there are some photos that exist of various actors sitting in the control room there where we recorded, crying and laughing and being together, because it was such a special moment.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Henry Hay, this has been wonderful. I'm going to ask just two closing questions.
Sure.
The one is whether it was with Bowie or not, what would you say to somebody who has gotten to this point in the interview and wants to know, hey, I want to hear more from Henry Hay? What would be I didn't mean to make a pun, but a representative samples, like what would you want somebody to hear from you?
I'm not sure that pure fans of David Bowie would connect with my music, but I have a instrumental band that I'm very proud of called FORQ, FORQ, and we have 5 albums that are available on every platform. I'm the leader of that band and the prime composer. I also have an acoustic jazz trio album, 2 acoustic jazz piano trio albums that I'm very proud of. And I also love pop music, so I've written a bunch of songs with Empire of the Sun and some other people. I love music of all styles, and I love melody. So
Yeah.
if you find something exciting in that, then that's great.
Great. Well, I'll definitely post some samples from those. So I close with the question I ask everybody. It's the most superficial possible question. What is your favorite David Bowie song and album, whether you were involved or not?
Wow. Well,
no one can answer it.
I think I can answer it. I think that Hunky Dory might be my favorite.
Yeah.
And In a Way, Oh You Pretty Things is my favorite. In a way, because it's so simple, and it already spells out David's multiple parallels with songwriting and lyrics. And it's such a young age. He already had this vision for how things should go, and he starts to create characters and starts to talk about parallel meanings, and what an artistic life that came after that.
Yeah. Wow. Excellent suggestion, or excellent selections. Henry Hay, this has been wonderful. Thank you for everything that you're doing. I'll if I don't see you before, I'll see you next year at the next Cutting Room show. Looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.